Welcome to this edition of Workplace Culture Wisdom, a conversation series with experienced leaders. I'm here with Kristine Watts, who is an experienced HR leader and a women's coach and has been for over a decade. Kristine is here as part of our Workplace Culture Wisdom series of conversations with experienced leaders. Welcome, Kristine. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Kathy.
Yeah, very excited to have you as part of this series. And as you know, we've been working with the Healthy Workplace Culture brand for a little while now. And there are so many aspects to what comprises a healthy workplace culture. And today we're going to talk a little bit about burnout and how that is an indicator of a maybe not a healthy workplace culture. And I wanted to ask you, Kristine, like based on your experience, what does burnout in the workplace look like?
That's a good question. I think it's important to note one that burnout can certainly happen in the workplace for both individuals and teams, right? And that can look a little bit different, and the drivers of that can be a little bit different too. So when we talk about burnout in the workplace, for individuals, the drivers or the root cause of that might be coming from work or life, right? But it can certainly show up at work. And
Mm.
what I have found is it's usually some type of misalignment, right? And what I mean by that is a misalignment in their life, in that they are not feeling fully aligned to their values or their purpose or what's important to them. So when we look at that at work, that may be things like maybe they are, in a team or doing work that's not aligned to their values or what's important to them. Or it might just be maybe a job mismatch for them. When we look at teams, um, teams can certainly collectively experience burnout, which is usually a signal of something larger, like cultural or structural challenges, right? And so this may mean that it's a workplace that has really high workload demands, high pressure deadlines, maybe just unrealistic expectations. Maybe there's not great recognition systems and things of that nature, or it's just an overall toxic workplace.
Oh, that's really comprehensive. And I love that you touched on both individuals and teams, and you mentioned some of the indicators.
Mhm.
Are you aware of any early indicators that a team leader or organizational leader could be aware of that would help them head off
Mhm.
employee burnout before it happens?
Yeah, I love this question because I think that's the right question to be asking, right? What are the early signs so that we can address burnout soon? And I like to kind of think about this, Kathy, in terms of a snowball. Burnout can very much be like a snowball. The early signs may be really subtle, but if left unattended and we don't do anything to address those, it's going to quickly snowball into much more serious and pervasive issues. And so the analogy I like to use is kind of a green, yellow, red. The green zone is really where we want individuals and teams to be. This is when energy's high. We have an optimistic outlook. We can focus for long periods of time. We're feeling, a sense of alignment, right? There's really no signs of burnout there. That yellow zone is when those signs of burnout are starting to creep in. And this is really the opportunity zone to recognize what those early signs and symptoms are for both individuals and teams so that we can address them early on. So, some of the things that we might notice in this yellow zone is maybe just overall energy levels and motivation have declined. We might be seeing, some quality issues or productivity issues. Maybe the things that for individuals, typically would bring them joy, they maybe just don't have as much interest in, or there's higher stress levels for things that maybe they would have been able to handle before, but all of a sudden feel a lot more stressful and overwhelming. So there's just a couple examples of the things that you might experience in that yellow zone. And then that red zone is really that it's honestly can be quite scary, right? That's where we really don't want to be. This is when individuals and teams are really in the thick of that mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion and burnout. And that can lead to, individuals and teams really have performance issues. maybe individuals just aren't able to really deal with the demands of life. And this is when more serious things like really chronic health issues, whether it's anxiety, depression, or even physical health issues, can come into play too. So, being able to recognize those early signs is so key to be able to mitigate and prevent really serious burnout that has a tremendous impact for both individuals and teams.
Just in listening to you speak, Kristine, I feel like maybe you've created some employee wellness programs or something like that to help address these issues before they go really deep.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that workplaces can consider when thinking about, how do we prevent burnout or help employees, mitigate burnout quickly if and when it happens. And so, a couple of things to keep in mind for workplaces is one, having a great employee listening strategy, I think is so key, right? Because we can use things like surveys and focus groups and one on ones and things of that nature to really dig deep and understand the root cause of burnout. And I think that's so important to understand because, particularly when we're looking at a team level, if there are cultural or structural things that are driving that burnout, we have to understand that root cause to be able to address it effectively. If we don't, we may just throw some tactics at what we think is happening. We might even experience, a little bit of success, but I really just view that as a band-aid, right? It might help for a moment, but it's not addressing that root cause. And so these issues are going to continue. Another thing that I think workplaces can consider are things like peer support groups, whether that's employee resource groups, peer mentoring groups, things of that nature, to where employees feel connected. They can reach out to others who might be experiencing, similar things and have resources, people to bounce ideas off of and learn from. The last thing I would say is, for workplaces to keep in mind is the importance and the role of middle managers. We know from research that, your immediate supervisor is playing an increasingly important role in employee well-being and engagement of our workforce and just overall organizational success. And so I truly believe that the organizations that can equip and empower middle managers to be great coaches to their employees. And that means giving them the resources and the tools, but also the time and capacity to be great coaches, to focus on employee well-being and engagement. I truly believe that's going to be a competitive advantage for organizations because they are best positioned to help support their employees.
That's fantastic. And when you mentioned competitive advantage, I kind of go to, and what are the other reasons why an organization should care whether or not their employees are headed to burnout or whether they're actually in a really healthy, motivated kind of space?
Yeah. Regardless of the root or the cause of burnout, you know, the reality is that burnout is pervasive. I've experienced burnout myself in my life, both in my personal life and my work life. And the reality is you can't separate that. I can't be burnt out in life and show up at work and just turn that off. Nor can I be burnt out at work and then just turn that off when I get home. It shows up and it manifests in all areas of our life. And so workplaces should care about this because when we are burnt out or even starting to just experience some of those early burnout signs, the reality is employees are not able to show up as their best, right? They're not able to give their full energy and talents to their work and they're not fully engaged. And we know there's a very real cost to a lack of engagement in the workplace.
That is so true. And we like to kind of think about our life being in buckets, or sometimes I think about it as the many streams of life. But you're right. The reality is we're one person, and that one
Mhm.
person shows up at work or at home or wherever else we may be. And you can't completely separate those
No.
things out, especially if you're going through burnout or a sense of burnout. And thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else that you want to say on the topic before we close out our little conversation here today?
I think the only other thing I would say is when we look at burnout from kind of an individual perspective, Um, I think one of the drivers of burnout for individuals is an absence of joy or energy giving activities. And so this really requires individuals to really evaluate from a holistic perspective. If they're feeling those signs of burnout, what areas of my life need more attention and nourishment? And I think where we get stuck in burnout is we tend to be in a kind of this all in or all out mentality. We tend to
Mhm.
think we need to make these big drastic changes, right? I need a new job or I need to make this significant change in my life. But the reality is those are big scary changes which trigger that critter brain, right? Which can leave us in just kind of that state of paralysis and we don't do anything. So we continue to experience that, right? So for individuals, and this is also something for leaders to keep in mind when they're supporting employees through this, it really comes down to burnout cannot be prevented or solved with a week-long vacation. It's what are we doing in our daily rituals and habits to support ourselves and address those causes of burnout and prevent burnout. And it's those small shifts that we can make to infuse more energy and joy and alignment into our lives that's going to make a difference both in our personal lives and at work.
And Kristine, you've also reminded me that sometimes when we're in it, we don't recognize it within ourselves, which then
Mhm.
speaks to the importance of having support networks,
Mhm.
because sometimes we just think that we're losing it.
Yeah.
And if we have someone who can be a sounding board and or provide some validation for us, then we can see that we need more support or we need help or we need to do what you just said, which is make some even small changes to try to bring ourselves out of that situation.
Yeah. And if we're just in the thick of it and we're just running every single day, we don't have that space to take a moment to look
Right.
inward and even recognize that. Whether it's, you just build some habits like, before you walk into the door at work, you're just going to stop and take, 3 deep breaths and just do a quick check in. Maybe it's, over the lunch break, you're just going to do a 1 minute body scan and just say, how am I? What's going well? What do I need? There's small things that we can infuse into our day, no matter how busy we are, to just create that moment of space and clarity so that we can see those in ourselves. And obviously, having those in our support network who can help us see that are critical too.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for those like very quick ways to be able to check in with yourself to
Mhm.
get a sense of where you're at or what you might need in any given moment. That's perfect. And thank you for this conversation on burnout. You have offered just so much wisdom here, which is exactly what we were looking for. But you have a very comprehensive understanding of burnout and healthy workplace culture and how to support people. And I really appreciate that you brought that here today with me.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity, Kathy. Thanks so much.
Go to worldviewprograms.com to learn more about our healthy workplace culture program options.